Sinister Stories.
Mara Spencer was tired, really exhausted. She hadn't intended to leave work so late, but one thing led to another, and before she knew it, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and she was facing a 4-hour drive in the dark. As her car wound along the lonely, narrow roads leading deeper into rural Maine, the familiar tension settled between her shoulders. Her GPS flickered in and out of service, the screen showing her a blue dot in the middle of a blank map. But the house had looked perfect online, rustic but cozy, a little slice of peace tucked away from the world. She needed this weekend away more than anything. Work had been a grind, and the thought of escaping to the quiet of an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere was the only thing that had kept her going. After what felt like an eternity, the GPS finally announced, "You have arrived." The house was just as it had appeared in the photos, a quaint 2-story cottage with white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch. But in the darkness, it seemed larger, looming almost, the shadows clinging to it like something alive. Mara shook off the unease. It was just the exhaustion talking. Fumbling to enter the code on the lock, she let herself inside, taking a quick, cursory look around. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and something faintly sweet. Lavender, maybe? She didn't linger long, her legs heavy with fatigue. The bedroom was upstairs, and she collapsed onto the bed without bothering to change out of her clothes. Sleep pulled her under almost immediately, and she didn't wake for nearly 12 hours. When she finally stirred, it was nearly midday, and the sun streamed in through the windows. Mara felt better, rejuvenated. After a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, she decided to explore the house. It was charming in the daylight, the interior filled with old furniture and little knickknacks that gave it a lived-in feel. It was clear that someone had put a lot of care into decorating the place, but it was the closet in the master bedroom that caught her attention. The doors were slightly ajar, revealing a neatly organized array of clothes hangers and empty shelves. Nothing unusual, but as she reached to close the doors, her fingers brushed against something hard. It was the faintest of clicks, and the back panel of the closet shifted. A hidden compartment. Mara's heart quickened as she pulled the panel aside, revealing a small cubbyhole. Inside were several old, worn shoeboxes. She pulled one out, curious. The lid came off easily, and she found herself staring at a stack of photographs. They were faded, curled at the edges, but as she flipped through them, a chill ran down her spine. The photos were of a family, a mother, a father, and a little girl. The father was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a stern expression. The mother was smiling, her hair a halo of curls. The little girl was perhaps 5 or 6, her wide eyes full of innocence. Mara froze. That little girl was her. Her hands trembled as she rifled through the photos, each one showing the same family, in the same house. There was the living room with its stone fireplace, the kitchen with its quaint floral wallpaper, and the porch with its white railings. She could remember those things, faintly. But that was impossible. Her family had never been to Maine. They had lived in Ohio for her entire childhood. She dropped the photos, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This had to be a mistake, a trick of her tired mind. Maybe the little girl just looked like her. But as she stared at the photos scattered on the floor, the memories tugged at the edges of her mind. She did remember a house like this. A summer, maybe, long ago? But how? Why hadn't she remembered before? Frantic, Mara grabbed her phone and dialed her mother's number. It rang and rang, but there was no answer. She left a voicemail, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. She needed to know if they had ever been to this house, if these memories were real. To distract herself, Mara decided to take a walk around the property. It was a beautiful day, and the fresh air might clear her head. She wandered through the overgrown garden, the flowers and shrubs wild with neglect. There was a small pond at the edge of the property, and as she stood by the water's edge, she felt a strange sense of déjà vu. This place was familiar, in a way that unsettled her deeply. As she walked back to the house, the sky began to darken. The first drops of rain splattered onto the ground, and by the time she reached the porch, it had turned into a full downpour. She hurried inside, shaking off the water and trying to ignore the creeping dread that had settled in her stomach. Back in the bedroom, she walked to the window, trying not to look at the bed, but her mind kept wandering back to those photos. They were spread out on the bed where she had left them, and one in particular caught her eye. It was Ashada. Her phone buzzed on the table, startling her so badly she nearly dropped the picture. A text from her mother. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. "No, baby, we've never been to Maine." Mara stared at the message, her mind spinning. If her family had never been to Maine, then why did she remember this house? Why were there pictures of her as a child here? Nothing made sense anymore. Before she could process this, there was a knock at the door. A loud, firm knock that echoed through the quiet house. Mara's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. Who would be out in the rain at a time like this? She hesitated, then called out, "Who is it?" A man's voice replied, "Hi, I'm your neighbor. They're predicting a huge storm tonight. I was wondering if you needed anything." Her unease deepened. She hadn't seen any other houses nearby when she arrived, but maybe she had just missed them in the dark. Still, something about the situation felt off. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause. "I saw your car in the driveway," the man said finally. "I just wanted to check in." Mara hesitated, but she couldn't think of a reason to refuse him. Maybe it was just her nerves getting the better of her. She went to the door and opened it. A man stood on the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, his clothes damp from the rain. He had a friendly enough face, but there was something in his eyes that made Mara uneasy. He smiled at her, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks for checking in," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "I'm Mara." "Nice to meet you, Mara," he replied, wiping his feet on the mat. "Name's Jack." They exchanged small talk for a few minutes, and Mara found herself relaxing a little. Maybe she was just being paranoid. Jack seemed nice enough, just a concerned neighbor looking out for her. But then, as they talked, she mentioned the photos she had found. "There's something strange about this place," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "I found some old photos in the closet of a family, and I'm in them. But I don't remember being here." Jack's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He set down the cup of tea she had offered him and leaned back in his chair. "Photos, you say?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "May I see them?" Mara hesitated, but then nodded. She led him upstairs to the bedroom where the photos were still spread out on the bed. Jack looked at them, picking one up and examining it closely. His face remained unreadable. "Are you sure it's you?" he asked after a moment. "I'm sure," Mara said. "I remember the house now, vaguely, but my mother says we've never been to Maine." Jack didn't respond right away. He set the photo down carefully, his gaze distant. "There are places," he said slowly, "that hold on to memories, even when we don't. Sometimes those memories find their way back to us." Mara frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, his eyes dark and serious. "I think you've been here before, Mara. A long time ago. Maybe this place is trying to tell you something." A chill ran down her spine. "Do you think so?" she asked, her voice trembling. Then Jack snickered and smiled and said, "No, you've never been here before," in a cold, creepy voice. "What do you mean I've never been here? Those photos, how do you explain them? They can't be fake." Mara felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. She backed away from him, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for some kind of proof that this was all just a bad dream. But the more she looked, the more she realized how little she truly recognized. The decor, the furniture, even the layout of the house. It all matched the photos perfectly. Every detail was exactly where it should be, down to the last picture frame and the faded floral wallpaper. It was as if the house had been frozen in time, untouched for years, and yet somehow she had been dropped into it, like a character in a movie she didn't remember auditioning for. "I have memories," she said, more to herself than to Jack. I remember this place, the garden, the pond, it all feels so familiar. How could that be if I've never been here? Jack's chuckle was low and condescending, sending a chill down Mara's spine. Déjà vu can be a powerful thing, especially when your mind is trying to reconcile the impossible. Your memories are nothing more than your brain's way of filling in the gaps, creating a narrative to make sense of the photos you've seen. That's all they are, Mara. Fabrications. There's nothing real about them. No, Mara said, shaking her head violently, as if that could dispel the growing sense of dread. No, I remember. My dad used to... Your parents? Jack cut her off sharply, his smile fading as his eyes narrowed. Your parents never brought you here, Mara. They didn't bring you anywhere near this place. Everything you think you remember is a lie. Mara felt like she was going to be sick. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, and her chest tightened with each word Jack spoke. Nothing made sense anymore, and she was beginning to doubt her own sanity. She had to get out of here. She had to leave, to get back to the real world, where things made sense and she wasn't questioning the very fabric of her existence. I'm leaving, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. I don't care about the storm. I'm not staying here another minute. She turned and made her way to the front door, her heart pounding in her chest. She grabbed the handle and twisted, expecting it to swing open easily, but it didn't budge. Panic flared in her chest as she twisted the handle harder, rattling the door in its frame, but it remained stubbornly shut. Locked. From the inside. What? She gasped, her fingers slipping off the cold metal as she turned to look at Jack, who was still standing in the living room, watching her with that same eerie calm. Poor Mara, he said softly, almost pityingly. Remembering a house you've never been to, it's funny how easily the mind can play tricks on us, isn't it? Mara's blood ran cold. Jack, what's going on? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Mara shook her head, her back pressed against the door as if that could somehow force it open. I still don't understand, she stammered. The photos. How do you explain them? What about the memories, the house, the garden? Those photos, Jack interrupted, his tone once again condescending. You don't recognize them? They're funny, aren't they? It's amazing what people are willing to post online, sharing every little detail of their lives with the world. Photos of their childhood, their vacations, their homes. People think they're just sharing memories with friends, but they don't realize they're giving away their entire identity to anyone who cares to look. Mara's heart was racing now, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. What are you talking about? Jack's expression softened, as if he were explaining something to a child who just couldn't understand. Those photos are photoshopped, Mara, every single one of them. They're composites, created from the images you've posted online over the years. I know your whole life, your parents' names, where you work, where you went to school. I even know when you're on vacation, like now. Mara's legs felt weak, and she slid down to the floor, her back still pressed against the door. This can't be real, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. This can't be happening. Jack crouched down in front of her, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her shudder. It is real, Mara, and now you're here, in a place you think you know but you've never been to before. And the truth is, there's no way out. Mara's breath hitched in her throat, the tears now spilling over as she stared at him, trying to find some trace of the kind, concerned neighbor he had pretended to be. But there was nothing in his eyes now but cold, calculating malice. Why? She managed to choke out, her voice thick with fear and desperation. Why are you doing this? Jack stood up slowly, his expression unreadable as he looked down at her. Because I can, he said simply. Because you made it so easy. You handed over your life, piece by piece, without even realizing it. And now you're mine. Mara's heart pounded in her chest, the reality of her situation crashing down on her like a tidal wave. She had been so careful, so cautious about her online presence, or at least she thought she had been. But somehow, Jack had found a way in, had pieced together her entire life from the fragments she had shared with the world. And now she was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. "I just wanted a quiet weekend," she whispered, more to herself than to Jack. "I just wanted to get away." Jack's smile returned, but this time it was full of malice. "And now you'll never leave," he said, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "This house is yours, Mara, just like you wanted, and no one will ever find you here." Mara's mind raced, desperate for a way out, but every door, every window seemed to be locked, trapping her in this twisted version of reality that Jack had created. She had no idea how to escape, no idea if escape was even possible. And with every passing second, the walls seemed to close in on her, the air growing thicker, suffocating her with the weight of her own fear. Jack walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside, revealing the dark, stormy night outside. "The storm will cover any trace of you," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "No one will come looking for you, not for a long time. By then, it will be too late." Mara's breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling with fear. She couldn't stay here, couldn't let Jack do this to her. But the door was locked, the windows barred. There was no way out, no escape. "Where do you think you're going?" he hissed, his voice full of anger and something darker, more sinister. Mara struggled against him, panic fueling her movements, but it was no use. He was too strong, his grip too tight. She was trapped, just as he had planned. "Let me go!" she screamed, her voice hoarse with fear, but Jack just laughed, a low, cruel sound that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. "You're not going anywhere, Mara," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "You're mine now, and there's no escape." Mara was able to escape his grasp for now. Mara's heart raced as she bolted through the house, her mind a maelstrom of terror and desperation. She darted into the first room she saw, a small study with old books lining the walls. She threw herself behind a large, overstuffed armchair, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to still her racing heartbeat. Jack's laughter echoed through the house, a cold, mocking sound that made Mara's skin crawl. "There's nowhere to hide, Mara," he called out, his voice carrying through the halls with a terrifying ease. "You can't escape." Mara's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that might help her, but all she saw were old, dusty books and a heavy wooden desk. She was trapped. She had to move, had to keep running. She couldn't let him find her. She crawled out from behind the chair and made her way to the door, inching it open just a crack to peer into the hallway. Jack's footsteps grew closer, his heavy tread echoing off the wooden floors. Mara's breath hitched in her throat. She had to find somewhere to hide, somewhere he wouldn't think to look. She sprinted back down the hall and ducked into a closet in one of the bedrooms, pulling the door closed behind her. She sank to the floor, her back pressed against the wall as she tried to control her breathing. She could hear Jack's footsteps moving from room to room, his voice calling out in that chilling, mocking tone. "You're not getting away, Mara. I'll find you." Her tears flowed freely now, mingling with the cold sweat on her face. She clutched her knees to her chest, trying to remain as silent as possible. The darkness of the closet seemed to close in around her, and the sound of Jack's footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. The door to the closet creaked open and Mara's heart nearly stopped. She held her breath, waiting for Jack to find her. The light from the hallway cut through the crack in the door, casting long shadows into the small space. She could see Jack's silhouette, his face partially obscured by the dim light. He paused, sniffing the air, and then pushed the door open further. Mara's panic surged as she realized she had to act fast. She launched herself out of the closet, catching Jack off guard. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with surprise as Mara barreled past him. She ran down the stairs, her feet pounding against the wooden steps. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline. She had to get to the front door. It was her only chance. She reached the front hallway, her eyes scanning desperately for a way out. But before she could reach the door, Jack's voice called out from behind her. "You can't keep running, Mara. I'll find you no matter where you go." Mara's eyes fell on the fireplace poker by the hearth. The old iron tool seemed to gleam with a faint, cold light. It was her only hope. She grabbed it and turned, her resolve hardening despite the terror still gripping her. Jack was already at the bottom of the stairs, his face twisted into a cruel smile as he approached her. Mara didn't hesitate. She swung the poker with all her might, catching Jack off guard. The heavy iron struck him across the shoulder, causing him to stagger back with a grunt of pain. Jack's eyes widened in shock and anger. "You little..." Before he could finish, Mara took advantage of his momentary disorientation and rushed toward the front door. She threw herself against it, twisting the handle with frantic desperation. The door resisted at first, but with a final wrenching pull, it gave way, swinging open to the torrential storm outside. Mara dashed into the storm, the rain lashing against her as she sprinted down the driveway. The wind howled around her, making it difficult to see, but she kept running, her fear driving her forward. Behind her, Jack's voice was faint, lost in the roar of the storm. "You can't escape, Mara. This is your place now." Mara's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to keep moving. She glanced back and saw Jack standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the stormy darkness. He watched her with a look of cold satisfaction, but he made no move to follow her into the rain. As Mara ran, she could feel the cold seeping into her bones, the storm's fury surrounding her. Her thoughts raced as she tried to figure out what to do next. She had to get to safety, away from this nightmare. After what felt like an eternity, Mara spotted the faint glow of headlights through the rain. She waved her arms frantically, her cries lost in the wind. The car slowed and came to a stop beside her, the driver's window rolling down to reveal a concerned face. "Are you okay? What happened?" the driver shouted over the storm. Mara scrambled into the car, her body shaking with cold and fear. "Please, just get me out of here," she pleaded. "I need to get away from that house." The driver nodded and pulled away from the driveway, the car accelerating down the road. Mara glanced back one last time, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was a dark, indistinct shape in the distance, and Jack's figure was no longer visible. As the car sped away, Mara slumped into the seat, her mind still reeling from the events of the night. She didn't know where she was headed or what the future held, but for the first time since arriving at that house, she felt a sliver of hope. She was free, at least for now, and that was enough. While driving, she quickly pulled out her phone and proceeded to delete all her social media accounts.